The courtroom buzzed with the kind of energy that only accompanied high-stakes cases. Lawyers strode across the floor with confident urgency, briefcases snapping open and shut as they reviewed their notes. Journalists leaned into recorders, whispered observations, and scribbled furiously, already drafting headlines. Every seat in the gallery was filled with murmuring spectators, their conversations blending into a low hum. At the center of this orchestrated chaos sat Judge Hamilton Rayner, a man in his mid-50s, tall, composed, with a presence both formidable and fair. Hamilton wore his black robe like a mantle of quiet power. His calm gaze swept across the room, anchoring it with the quiet force of someone who did not just understand the law, but the people it was supposed to serve. He was widely respected not only for his intellect and command of legal principles, but for his empathy and patience. Today's case was no ordinary hearing. A black teenager, only 16, had been wrongfully arrested for a crime everyone in the room was beginning to understand he couldn't possibly have committed. The arrest had ignited outrage and drawn scrutiny from the media, advocacy groups, and concerned citizens alike. Judge Rayner knew the spotlight was on him. How he handled this would reverberate far beyond the walls of his courtroom. He greeted the attorneys and jury with his signature measured tone, deep and composed, instantly commanding the room's attention. As the lawyers took their places, the heavy wooden door to the courtroom banged open. All heads turned. In strode Officer Declan Cross, barely out of the academy. His uniform looked slightly too large for his lean frame, but the self-assurance with which he walked suggested he thought it fit him like a suit of armor. Declan moved with the exaggerated swagger of someone trying too hard. He scanned the room, soaking up the attention he imagined he deserved, a smirk tugging at his lips. "All right, let's get this circus rolling," Declan called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. The bailiff gave him a hard glare, but Declan either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. As he approached the judge's bench, he offered a few barely audible but pointed comments to people seated nearby. He was clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. When he reached the bench, he slapped a file down with unnecessary force and leaned forward. Not every day you see a judge who looks like he belongs outside holding a protest sign instead of sitting up here calling the shots. The courtroom went dead silent. Not a murmur, not a shuffle. The reporter's fingers froze mid-keystroke. Judge Rayner didn't react. He merely looked up with the same calm expression he'd worn since the beginning of the session, held Declan's gaze for a second, then returned to his file. The room remained still. Encouraged by what he took to be passivity, Declan doubled down. "What's the matter, Judge? You sure you're cut out for this? Places like this need strength, not sympathy." The gallery shifted uneasily. Whispers swept the room. The judge, still composed, continued with the session. He posed his questions to the attorneys, dismantled arguments with clarity, his voice steady, his mind razor-sharp. He commanded the court effortlessly. Yet Declan, seated conspicuously in the gallery, continued his disruptive behavior. Every time Judge Rayner issued a ruling or commented, Declan would scoff or mutter under his breath. People seated near him exchanged uncomfortable looks. One woman finally turned to glare at him, but Declan returned her stare with a grin, daring her to respond. When the court recessed, Declan saw his moment. He walked up to where the attorneys were gathered, his voice carrying through the courtroom. "Not surprised this judge is so soft. Seems more concerned with looking righteous than being right." Before the defense attorney could answer, a shadow fell over them. Judge Rayner had left his bench. He approached with deliberate calm, his steps resonating like a metronome. That he stopped in front of Declan and asked quietly but firmly, "Are you finished?" For a split second, Declan faltered, but then he squared his shoulders. "Just telling the truth. Someone's got to say it." The gallery held its breath. The judge looked at Declan for another moment, then turned without a word and returned to his seat. He resumed court as if nothing had happened, his calm demeanor unshaken. Declan smirked again, but everyone else in the room could feel the shift. Judge Rayner wasn't ignoring him. He was giving him rope that as the session drew to a close. Judge Rayner's voice filled the courtroom with final remarks. His words were powerful, his tone serene, each syllable chosen with care. That's when Declan made his final mistake. Loudly, mockingly, he interrupted. With speeches like that, Judge, you could have gone into acting. Too bad the bench doesn't pay for theatrics. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge slowly raised his head. This time, the room could feel it. The weight behind his silence, the force gathering behind his gaze. Then he stood, and with the full dignity of his position, he said, "Young man, the uniform you wear is supposed to represent honor and duty. But today, you've used it as a mask for arrogance and ignorance. This courtroom is not a stage. It's a place where justice is served and dignity upheld. If you doubt that, then perhaps you should reconsider whether you belong in this system at all. Because this bench, this courtroom, and this calling demand respect, not just for the role, but for the people we are meant to protect." Declan's smirk vanished. The courtroom remained silent. Judge Rayner wasn't finished. Turning to the room, he added, "No insult, no matter how loudly spoken, can diminish your worth unless you allow it. The measure of a person's character isn't found in who they tear down, but in who they choose to lift up." There was a pause. Then, slowly, one clap rang out. Then another. Within seconds, the entire courtroom rose to its feet in thunderous applause. Declan stood frozen, his face pale, his bravado shattered. Judge Rayner tapped his gavel once. "Court is adjourned." He gathered his notes, descended the bench, and walked calmly out of the room. The applause followed him like a tide, rising even as he disappeared beyond the doors, and Declan Cross was left alone, standing among those who had just witnessed a lesson that would never be forgotten.